Good morning, everyone.
Good
My name
morning.
is, Hi, Kayla. My name is Sarah Kelly Palmer, and
And
Kayla
I'm
David
Kayla David.
joining us this morning. Welcome, everyone, to Be Well Live. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. For those of you who haven't been with us before, Kayla and I are part of the healing department at Family Service of Rhode Island, and we come together here to talk about various topics related to wellness and how to cope during this most recent pandemic. Family Service of Rhode Island is a social service and behavioral health organization, and we've been around for a really long time, and we offer a variety of services, including telehealth counseling.
We typically do our live streams every other Wednesday, but this week was different. In the last week, we have seen two horrific attacks of mass gun violence in our nation. 7 days ago, 8 people were killed in Atlanta in a hate-filled attack against women in the Asian American community. And 3 days ago, 10 people were killed in Boulder, Colorado, while shopping in a grocery store. In between those two events were other mass shootings in places like Philadelphia, Houston, Gresham, Oregon, Stockton, California, and Dallas.
The attack in Boulder, Colorado was the seventh mass shooting in 7 days. Last Saturday alone, our nation had 3 mass shootings occur. For so many, we continue to watch in horror as the aftermath of these horrific crimes unfold on our TV, on our phone screens, on covers of newspapers and magazines, and many worry that we will see even more violence to come. The Gun Violence Archive, which tracks gun violence nationwide, found that last year, in 2020, it was the highest rate of gun violence deaths in the past 2 decades.
Violent events can leave us and our children feeling confused, scared, and uncertain about their safety. With so much uncertainty, we wanted to take time this week to discuss tips for talking to kids about current events that are confusing and scary. The first tip is to limit children's media exposure. With the COVID-19 pandemic in particular, it keeps many of us home. We're home more with less to do, which can mean more time in front of TVs or screens. Even if we or our children are not actively watching, many of us play the news in the background. And that background news can have a big impact on our mood and our anxiety. It can be helpful to limit what our children are watching, to not have the TV or news on in the background, and to watch the news with our children if we're going to have it on. One of the things that's also really helpful as we spend more and more time on our phones is to review your phone notification settings and those of your children's. I know for me in the last week, I've received umpteen amounts of news notifications about the violent attacks across our country. And while it's important to be informed, the sheer number of those coming in, it wasn't just one to inform me about what was going on. It was hundreds to inform me. Each time buzzing on my phone or lighting up my phone screen, and automatically my brain looks at it and I'm taking in that information, even if I don't click on that news article. So again, it's helpful to be informed, but too much of the same information can be overstimulating and can lead to increases in anxious thoughts, sleep disturbance, and can negatively impact our psychological safety. And that's the same for children. What we learned, many years ago with 9/11 was that young children especially believed that the attacks were happening over and over and over again because we were showing the same footage on the news. So if we do have the news in the background for our preschool age children, they can actually kind of take that information in as if it's happening in real time. So they're kind of envisioning that more and more attacks are happening when we're seeing that same news footage in the background.
And I think that's such a good point, Kayla, because the other thing for us all to remember is that kids, teens, young adults are watching and they're aware of what's happening and going on around them. So even if you don't think your child is paying attention to that news broadcast, or if you don't think that they're paying attention to the cover of the newspaper, they are very much aware. So the next thing that we really encourage parents and caregivers to do is to really focus on comforting your child. So whether it's a hug, telling them that they are safe and that you're working hard to keep them safe. When tragic things happen like a mass shooting, it's very important for us to make it a priority to comfort our children first and foremost, right? So before you dig into kind of the tough stuff and maybe some details about what's happening, to provide them that comfort. Just as Kayla was talking about, for younger children, they're kind of making up their own narrative in their head, right? And oftentimes they tend to wonder if something bad is going to happen to them or if something bad is going to happen to you as a parent. So for example, the recent tragic shooting in Colorado happened in Colorado, which is not that close to us here in Rhode Island, but for a very young child, they might not understand that that happened, kind of far away. They don't have that level of awareness. So it's really important for parents and caregivers to reassure them that you're there to help keep them safe. And that reassurance helps to bring them peace, but it also allows them to feel like a child, right? Where the burden of being the protector is on us as the parent or caregiver and not the child, that we are the ones who are tasked with keeping them safe. Kids really need parents and caregivers to be parents during times of crises. They need to see that we're there to protect them. It's also important for our children to know in an age-appropriate way what is going on in the world. Because like I said, there is a level of awareness there, even if we think that they're not paying attention. When we're talking to our children, it's important to be direct and to also be honest. It can be helpful to pause and ask your child what they know about a particular event. Not only what they know, but are they confused about anything that they've heard? And then to follow it up and ask about any feelings they have about what they are seeing or hearing. So this allows you as a parent to be able to respond to any misinformation, any concerns that your child may have, or any kind of inaccurate information or thoughts. We should not shy away from this. So these conversations are often difficult and uncomfortable, but we really shouldn't wait for our children to bring them to us. If you notice that your child is in the background when the news is on and they're hearing about a mass shooting, that's a great opportunity to sit down and check in with them and ask what's going. So that breaking news can really be a springboard for having these tough conversations. Especially for older children, it can often lead to conversations about injustice, racism, and free speech. So it's important to also check in with your teenagers, right? They may also want to talk about situations where they have either experienced or witnessed things like anti-Asian hate, anti-Semitism, racism, discrimination, or xenophobia. This is where it's important to help address any safety concerns that they may bring up and work through it with them. Our kids and teens are watching and they are so aware of what is happening. And it's our job as parents to have these difficult conversations with them and to reassure them.
Yeah. And know that it is normal to have, I think part of what's happened in our culture in America is it's become really normalized to have this amount of mass shootings, which it is not. It is not a normal thing that we are seeing 7 mass shootings in a single week. And with the normalization that comes with that being so common in our culture, what can often happen is people feel like they shouldn't have responses to these events that are going on. They might say, well, it's not happening here, so I shouldn't be, I shouldn't have the reaction I'm having. The reactions you're having are normal, and allowing space for those reactions for our children and for ourselves is really important, especially when we see ourselves in the people that are victims of that shooting, right? So whether that is that you are an Asian American and you see yourself and your family in what happened in Atlanta, or you are someone who goes to the grocery store often. I know for me, even though I know that didn't happen near here, going to the grocery store this week was a little scarier. And those are normal reactions to be having in this climate, in this environment where we're seeing this amount of violence. That being said, let's talk a little bit about how we keep things age appropriate for kids when we are talking to them. Because so I would say for all parents, you know your child better than, of course, we know them. So you really know what they can take in, their temperament, their meaning making, their understanding of the world. So that's also important to take into consideration. So we want to kind of understand, our own children, kind of put that in that framework. Well, also thinking about kind of age appropriateness. So for early elementary school children, we need to keep it brief, simple. We want to balance it with reassurance that their communities and their homes are safe and that there are adults there to protect them. So that idea of always look for the helpers, right, is really, really important. And we want to be continuously checking in that they understand, right? When we say someone is gone, right, when we're talking about death, that can be really confusing to someone who's in that kind of early elementary school age. They might not get the context of what that means or the language that you're using. So being clear and simple. And again, really limiting the exposure to what they're witnessing and what they're seeing. For upper elementary and early middle school children, they will likely be more vocal in asking questions about whether they are safe and what is being done to address issues of safety. So they may need assistance separating reality from fantasy and information from disinformation. So you want to discuss your efforts and the efforts of the community leaders to keep us all safe. And you're going to want to provide space for them to explore their beliefs about current events, history, and their hopes for the future. So once we're getting to that upper elementary school and early middle school, we can really be having more conversations about what is happening in terms of hate speech or what is happening in terms of violence against particular groups of people or discrimination or racism or xenophobia. We can begin to have those conversations, and we can begin to have conversations about how we come together as a community and how we kind of share the responsibility of keeping everyone safe. When we get to upper middle school and high school, those students will have strong and varying opinions about the causes of violence in our society. So again, as we get older, we might be having longer conversations, more in-depth conversations. They will want to share and possibly suggestions for how to make our community safer. And this is really an opportunity to get involved, right? I mean, these are all of our communities. It's things that we can do all together to try to dismantle some of these systemic oppressive forces. So it's important if we have kids that are saying, I have suggestions for how we keep our school safe or how we keep our community safe, to not dismiss those ideas, but to really kind of engage in talking about that as a family and then looking for ways that you can respond or become part of the solution. And we can emphasize that role that teens have and encourage them to think about what they can do to help bring awareness to social injustice and make meaningful change. So again, we really want to be kind of encouraging that and really having discussions about what is going on, in our society, that these violent attacks don't happen in a vacuum. Right, they really have to do with our culture, our society, what is what is going on in terms of kind of systemic oppression. And again, we always want to highlight the helpers. It isn't so important to kind of balance, the mass tragedies against against what happens when people are able to come together.
Yeah, it's so important, Kayla. And I think as you're having these conversations and, keeping in mind the age appropriateness, as Kayla was just talking about, it's also important to remember that this might not just be one conversation, that it's important to provide kind of ongoing reassurance and many opportunities and space or spaces to be able to process, ask questions, and learn um, about things like mass shootings or really tragic things that happen in our society. And really, this becomes an opportunity for parents to teach kids what we refer to as emotional literacy, right? And when we talk about emotional literacy, we're really just talking about the ability for kids to be able to recognize, read, or name your own emotions, right? So putting a name to that feeling that you're having, whether it's outraged, upset, sad, scared, or something else. When we're teaching kids emotional literacy, we want to teach them how to name their feelings and teach them that language that they might not already have to match those feelings and emotions. And this is a technique, Kayla, right, that we use in trauma treatment all the time, right? We know that many kids just don't have the emotional language to name what they're feeling inside and need our help to do that. And parents do this actually all the time, right? But to be really intentional about this can be really, really helpful for kids to get off their chest what they're feeling. Um, you know, and another way we can provide reassurance, right, and kind of offering those spaces to process is by checking in often. So, like I said, this isn't just a one and done conversation, right? Parents can give their children and teens a safe space to talk about what they're seeing and hearing and how their opinions might be different from a family member or a schoolmate or a neighbor. We like in my family to try to do that at the dinner table, right? We do this like high low, what was the high of your day and what was the low of your day, and it really helps to kind of encourage not only talking about the good feelings that we're having, but also maybe to check in about things that might be scary or confusing. um, for our teenagers, it's also helpful to remind them to be aware of misinformation out there that is not entirely truthful about a particular event, right? As Kayla mentioned earlier, particularly because of the pandemic, but if you're a teen, you're exposed to a lot of screens, a lot of media on an ongoing basis, and there can be information that's put out there that might not be accurate about situations that happen. So if you're doing that check-in with your teen, it can be really helpful to kind of check their information. And for some children, right, they may not express their concerns verbally. Okay, so all kids kind of deal with things differently, and there are kids out there, right, where we might, instead of them telling us how they're feeling, they might show us how they're feeling. So things like changes in their behavior, changes in their appetite or sleep patterns can indicate that a child or a teen might be feeling some anxiety or discomfort. So it's important to pay attention to not only what your child is telling you, right, but how they're acting, right, and what you're seeing in front of you. For most children, after a distressing event, these things will ease as we give them reassurance and help to ensure their safety. Those should go away with time. If they don't, that's when you want to kind of look to get some additional help. When we think about these tragic things that happen, like the mass shootings, in Colorado or Atlanta or the several others, there's unfortunately too many to name, it can be a great opportunity to model navigating big feelings through the practice of healthy coping skills. So we as parents, we as caregivers, can really show our kids and our teens what it looks like to get through an upsetting and distressing event by using our own healthy coping. So things like trying deep breathing exercises, that's a really great way to kind of reset and settle your nervous system. Or things like exercising or listening to music, right? We know that those help to kind of release those feel good chemicals in our brains, right? That give us pleasure. That can be really helpful. And the more that your kids see you managing your feelings in a healthy way, the more that they will be able to learn to learn to manage their own feelings and reactions, right? So and it's important, and we mentioned this, if you're having feelings about what's going on in the world, right? It's pretty likely that your children are having similar feelings or reactions and are aware of what's happening. So showing them how you're dealing with those can be a really good way to help reassure them and give them the tools to cope.
Our final tip is to try to maintain a normal routine. Senseless violence is hard for everyone to understand. It's hard for us to understand as adults. It's hard for our children to understand. Doing things that you enjoy, sticking to your normal routine, and being with your friends and families can help make us feel better. It can help us from worrying about that event. And what I would also say is engaging in anti-racist work as a family, as a part of our normal routine, not just when these big events happen. It is so important that we are talking about hate as families, as communities. If we can, reaching out to community members of the Asian American community and making sure that they're okay. Right? We have seen a dramatic increase since the beginning of COVID-19 in the amount of hate that our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities are receiving, the amount of violence against them, culminating in what we saw in Atlanta. So making sure that we are, in some ways, the COVID-19 crisis has made us, insulated, right? We're in our homes more, maybe we're not connecting with people in the same way. We still have to continue doing that work, and there are ways to make sure that our community is feeling like everyone is a member and everyone is welcome here, and we can still do that even in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. So please make sure that you're continuing to do that work, that anti-discrimination work, that anti-racist work in your families. It is so important that we are having these conversations, not just when violent attacks happen, but repeatedly in our families, with our friends, in our workspaces, to make sure that we are creating environments that are safe and welcoming to everyone.
Thank you all for joining us, and we will return again. Is it next Wednesday, Kayla?
Yeah, next Wednesday at 10 a.m.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we will be discussing next Wednesday. It is the very beginning. It's the Child Abuse Prevention Month. So we will be going live March 31st to talk about what's going on in May for child abuse prevention.
Thank you all. Be well and be safe.